Let's put the women and children to bed and go looking for dinner. John Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now. Want to remind you to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We are the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. Also want to remind you to like and subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on YouTube. We want to get up to 300 likes for this show. And we also want you to leave comments in the live chat. I will get to them later in the show. So please engage and let me know what's on your mind, college basketball related, as we get set to really dive into conference play over the next couple of weeks. And I also want to remind each and every one of you that aside from weeks there are holidays, we will be coming to you with a live show on Mondays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock Eastern. And if you can't get to that live show, listen to us on Apple or Spotify on your commute home or during your early morning workout. But with that said, since later in the week is New Year's Day and we will not be in the studio on New Year's Day, I have an exciting announcement. On Friday at noon Eastern, Inside College Basketball Now will be making its debut on CBS Sports Network. That will be Friday, January 2nd at noon Eastern. And again, if you can't catch us live on CBS Sports Network at noon Eastern, we will also be available on Apple, on Spotify, on YouTube later in the day. But for the first time ever since we started this show last March, Inside College Basketball Now will be live on television, noon Eastern, on CBS Sports Network. It's an exciting thing that our great team behind the scenes put together. We're excited to transition into television. There's so many exciting things. And again, I want to remind you that in addition to all the live shows we will be doing, either on YouTube or on CBS Sports Network later in the week, in addition to those shows, I will be bringing you exclusive interviews each and every week with the biggest and the best names in the sport. Coming up on Tuesday, it's Nebraska's Fred Hoiberg. Huskers obviously off to a 12-0 start, one of the great stories of the college basketball season. That show will hit YouTube at 8 o'clock Eastern on Tuesday morning. And I hope everybody had a great couple of days celebrating the holidays with their families. And before we get into the meat and potatoes of this show, college basketball was in the news over the week and be prior to that because of the addition of James Najee to Baylor, a midseason acquisition. He was one of a couple last week, and there was a lot of chatter about everything that's going on with personnel additions in college basketball. Dan Hurley, the UConn coach, weighed in on Twitter. Tom Izzo weighed in at a local press conference. This is all I'm going to say. And I have talked to multiple people on this podcast about this over the last couple of months. One was John Calipari. Another was Tom Izzo, who I just mentioned. Another was Mike Krzyzewski when we had Coach K on in November. There are so many questions right now about the state of college sports. There are so many questions that continue to linger, and nobody has any answers. And if anybody finds you wanting to engage in a conversation about this, there's one simple response. We have no rules off the court in college sports. And that is the best way to summarize everything that is going on right now in this new rendition of college sports. So are you asking me, am I surprised by what I see now? Absolutely not. Because a couple of years ago, when we saw rules change and when we saw goalposts moved, with immediate eligibility happening for transfers each and every year, with all of the things that really erased any sense of guardrails, I came to the conclusion that college basketball was going to be better than it's ever been in between the lines, and we've seen that in November to December. But in terms of finding some balance, in terms of finding some guardrails, in terms of finding some structure, we don't have that. We have no governance right now. And Coach K, if you want to go back and listen to what he said when I asked him the question, we don't know right now with the NCAA who to report to and who to inquire with when we have questions about these things. So if somebody asks you now about everything that's going on last week and what the rules and regulations are to add certain players that might have played professionally at the G League level or the NBA level, just remember this. We have no rules. And until we start instituting a backbone and a foundation, questions like these are going to continue to linger. But I choose to look at now things that we can really dive into and know we're going to have a resolution for when games start and continue to be played. And that's why I transition out of three big things. And I'm going to start with the first big thing on this show, talking about BYU freshman AJ Dybantsa, who right now is having a freshman season from a statistical perspective that's comparable to the freshman season that Carmelo Anthony had when he was at Syracuse, when the Orange won the national title in 2003. Now, this does not mean that AJ Dybantsa is going to lead BYU to a national championship or even the Final Four. But what I'm saying now is that Dybantsa, who came to BYU with all sorts of accolades, with all sorts of hype, with obviously the notion of being somebody who could be the number one overall pick in the 2026 NBA draft, he is not just living up to expectations that I had, he is superseding expectations because he is doing it in so many different facets of the game. AJ Dybantsa, right now, after 13 college games, is averaging 23.1 points per game, 7.2 rebounds, and 3.8 assists. Carmelo Anthony, during the 2002-2003 season at Syracuse, averaged 22.2 points per game and 10 rebounds per game. It's not identical, but it's pretty close. And I have talked time and time again on this podcast about BYU this season having its best chance in program history to get to a Final Four. And I think if you look at the way the season has started for the Cougars, those proclamations are correct. BYU is about to embark right now on its most anticipated 60-day stretch in the history of the Cougars program. Now, how can I say something like that? When we have seen BYU have shining moments in the past, going all the way back to Danny Ainge, to Jimmer Fredette, to what we even saw last year with Kevin Young in his first season, BYU never had a player like Dybantsa that was forecasted to be at the next level, what Dybantsa is. Now, with that said, I have spent a lot of time talking about the fact that, look, just because somebody is forecasted to be the number one pick in the NBA draft does not mean whatsoever that he's going to play on a really good college team. But a credit to BYU and that staff for putting Dybantsa around a group of players that are unequivocally going to be good enough to get BYU into the NCAA tournament with a favorable seed. Now, BYU does not have the non-conference victory of major proportions. BYU went to Boston, lost a really close game to UConn. But with that said, BYU has beaten several teams, in my opinion, that could still play in the NCAA tournament. The Clemson win at Madison Square Garden, Rob Wright's buzzer beater, I was there, I was going to travel. The Miami win on a neutral court in Orlando is going to travel. The Hurricanes, to me, look like an NCAA tournament team in year one under Jay Lucas. We'll see about Wisconsin, who obviously is going through a bit of a struggle right now. We will see if Kevin Willard and Villanova, who again got a big win just before Christmas against Seton Hall, can continue their trajectory towards returning to the NCAA tournament. But I'm looking at BYU now, and I'm seeing a team led by AJ Dybantsa that has the requisites after non-conference play to have multiple wins over teams that are going to play in the NCAA tournament. And the good thing for the Cougars is there is going to be nothing but quad one opportunities in Big 12 play. And I think you can make this case right now. And I think it's something that's going to be really fascinating when we get into the guts of the Big 12. Arizona and Iowa State have separated themselves as teams that are going to be in position to compete for number one seeds in the NCAA tournament. We know that. We understand that. You have to put Houston right behind those teams, who, again, has been slept on after that loss in November against Tennessee and Las Vegas. That's 3 teams out of the Big 12 that are in position right now to play for number 1 seeds in the NCAA tournament. Texas Tech just beat Duke and has the best 1-2 punch in college basketball with Christian Anderson and JT Toppin, 2 players who, again, are going to be All-Americans in 2026. And then there's BYU, led by AJ Dybantsa, a player, again, who statistically is doing things from a numbers perspective that Carmelo Anthony did for Syracuse in 2003. Now, I don't necessarily see somebody who could be like Hakeem Warwick. I don't necessarily see somebody yet who could maybe be Jerry McNamara or Billy Edelin or Queth Dwaney. BYU has had some unfortunate injuries. BYU's depth was a major question when I went to Provo for a preseason practice. But BYU 1 through 4 with Rob Wright, Richie Saunders, Kennard Davis, who's a very underrated glue guy, especially defensively, and Dybantsa has the personnel to match up with anybody in college basketball. Wright, Saunders, and Dybantsa are all going to be all Big 12 players. Kennard Davis is a great utility guy. The big question right now for BYU is whether or not Keba Keita is going to be good enough to hold down the middle. And a big question is, what is the depth going to be like for Kevin Young in Big 12 play? Losing Dawson Baker as a shooter hurts. Losing Nate Pickens as a reserve hurts. These were season-ending injuries that changed the landscape of BYU's rotation. But now BYU, led by AJ Dybantsa, is going to be, in my opinion, going into an area of a 2-month stretch that this program has never seen before. Because BYU basketball has always been a program that's operated from the periphery. Jimmer Fredette was obviously a revelation during the 2010-2011 season. That run ended in the Sweet 16 against Florida. I firmly believe that Mark Pope's team in 1920 before COVID, with Yoli Childs, with those guys, might have been able to make a run to the Final Four. BYU did beat Gonzaga later that year. But everything is aligned right now for AJ Dybantsa to become one of the faces of college basketball over the next couple of months, like Caleb Wilson, like Cam Boozer, like these guys right now who are going to change the way people operate with their viewing habits. He has been that good. He had a triple-double this month, and he's going to have the opportunity Saturday on CBS to make his Big 12 debut on a national stage against a Kansas State team that's trying to recalibrate itself for the NCAA tournament. The one thing I would point out, and I thought this before the season, but I think we're seeing it even more now, is that in order for BYU and Dybantsa to be a team that's good enough to go back to the second weekend and potentially beyond, you are going to need Richie Saunders to play at the level that he's playing at, which is to me just a shade below an All-American. But in his last 3 games, Saunders has hit 20-plus 3 straight times, and during that stretch, he is 9 of 20 from three-point range. Just as I was talking about with Christian Anderson and JT Toppin at Texas Tech, I see the same thing with Dybantsa and Saunders in terms of 1-2 punches. Saunders, who's averaging just under 19 points per game now, has to continue to be the ultimate Robin to Dybantsa if BYU is going to offset some of the depth issues that it has. But when you look now in totality at the Big 12 Conference, this is what I'm going to say from a depth perspective. Arizona, Iowa State, Houston, Texas Tech, BYU. The 5th place team that finishes the regular season in the Big 12 standings, the team that finishes 5th is going to play in the second weekend of the 2026 NCAA tournament. Want to get to other big things in college basketball? Want to also get your comments? Hit them in the chat. John Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ. Streaming free anywhere you are.
All right, John Rothstein back here on Inside College Basketball Now. Want to remind you to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We are the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of calendar year. Also want to remind you to like and subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on YouTube. And also leave us a comment. I'm going to get to them later in the show. And again, we want to get up to 300 likes on this show. And again, a programming note, in addition to today's live show right now, which is happening at 1 o'clock Eastern, and will continue, except for holidays, to come to you Mondays and Thursdays with live shows at 1 o'clock Eastern. On Friday, Inside College Basketball Now will make its debut on CBS Sports Network. That is going to be at noon Eastern on Friday, January 2nd. And again, in addition to that, we will have special shows with the biggest interviews with the biggest names in the sport, in addition to our live shows every week. Coming up Tuesday, it's a chat at 8 a.m. Eastern on YouTube with Nebraska's Fred Hoiberg. All right, the second big thing I want to hit, Purdue has done work in the shadows. Now, this happens sometimes in sports when a team suffers a devastating loss and a surprising loss. Purdue, on December 6th at Mackey Arena, lost to Iowa State 81-58. 23-point game. It was a blowout. The game was on CBS. But since that time, Purdue has ripped through its opponents like a chainsaw through butter. Minnesota, Marquette, and also Auburn. Now, out of those three teams, the only team you would say that feels like it's in position to compete for an NCAA tournament berth is Auburn, but it's still three power conference games. Purdue has won those three games by a combined 76 points. Purdue is also a team that early in the season won at Alabama, beat Texas Tech by 30. Purdue is also a team that returns 86% of its scoring from last season's team that lost to Houston in the Sweet 16. Purdue is also a team that was the consensus number one team in college basketball to start this year. Now, sometimes in sports, when a team suffers a loss in convincing fashion, especially when it happens at home, people seem to forget about that team for a while. And it feels like, from a national perspective, we have not really highlighted Purdue at all, since that loss to Iowa State. A lot of talk about Arizona, a lot of talk about Michigan, a lot of talk about UConn and Duke, and for good reason. But with that said, let's not forget that Purdue returned two players, Braden Smith, who's hit 36 assists in his last three games, and Trey Kaufman-Renn, who's currently averaging a double-double. Purdue returned those two players, both of whom were All-Americans last season. And the thing that I'm looking at closely with my fine-tooth comb is this. What are the ancillary guys doing for the Boilers? You know about Oscar Clough. He's 8-8. He's somebody who's going to fill the mortar between the bricks. You know about CJ Cox. What is Purdue going to get at Ja'Cory Harris? What is Purdue going to get at a Daniel Jacobson? And another thing that is really, really going under the rug right now. Can Purdue get Fletcher Lawyer back on track? Entering tonight's game against Kent State at Mackey Arena, and Kent State's a good mid-major team that could be a sneaky double-digit seed in the NCAA tournament. Entering this game, Fletcher Lawyer is 8 of 30 from 3 in December, and he's 14 of 42 from the field. Purdue needs Lawyer to be operating like one of the best shooters in the country if the Boilers are going to be, again, in the mix to play deep into the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Now, in conference play, which is right now what we're about to do the massive cannonball into, which is so exciting because conference play, there's different periods that you get excited about, obviously, during the college basketball season. The non-conference games have been great. They've been awesome. They've added so much sizzle to the sport. But when you get into conference play, And every single time now you're playing a high major opponent, every single game is like a heavyweight fight, regardless of who you're playing. But the schedule for Purdue, to me, has a chance to open up for the Boilers. Purdue's going to take on Kent State tonight. Purdue then takes on Wisconsin on Saturday in Madison, which is a bit of a swing game. And then Purdue is going to play Washington, Penn State, and Iowa all at Mackey Arena. With all due respect to those teams, I, at this point, cannot see Washington, Penn State, or Iowa being in a situation where they're going to Mackey Arena and getting a win. Purdue wins its next 5 games. It's 16-1 going into a West Coast trip against USC and UCLA. I think that the Wisconsin game in this stretch is the swing game. But again, Kent State at Wisconsin, Washington, Penn State, and Iowa. The key, though, for the Boilers, got to get Fletcher Laurer back on track. 8 of 30 from 3 in December. Now, another team that needs to get back on track, or at least get on track, because they haven't been that impressive so far this season, is NC State and Will Wade. And NC State and Will Wade need to make major hay during the month of January. But with that said, before you can get to January, you have to finish December. And this week is a massive week for Will Wade and NC State. And look, I felt, based on what we saw over the summer with the roster that was put together, NC State would be a little further along. The good thing for NC State is this. The Wolfpack don't have any bad wins. Don't have any bad losses on their resume. Seton Hall has turned out to be a formidable club under Shaheen Holloway in the Big East. Texas, again, looks like a middle-of-the-pack SEC team in year 1 under Sean Miller. Then, obviously, the Kansas loss at home was a heartbreaker, and the loss to Auburn on the road should age fine for the Wolfpack, as the Tigers, again, look like they're somewhere in the middle of the SEC. So there's no bad losses on NC State's resume, but there are also no signature victories. Ole Miss is the only power conference win that NC State has. Beat VCU, beat Liberty, beat Boise State, that's fine. But I am not going to throw a party here for NC State and for Will Wade, who took this job with the idea of crashing the ACC party and being a disruptor in the triangle alongside Duke and North Carolina. And now when you look at NC State, a team that has 9 victories and 4 losses heading into ACC play, it's real simple. The Wolfpack have to win 12 ACC games, and they have to be the right 12 if NC State is going to be in the NCAA tournament in 2026. And that starts this week. NC State is going to host Wake Forest, and NC State then on Saturday is going to host Virginia in Raleigh. The Virginia game starts at 11 a.m. Eastern on ESPN, and I'm going to say this now. It's a little bit of a tangent, but I want to get it off my chest. I don't understand why ESPN or another network does not have an 11 a.m. game or a 10 a.m. game every single Saturday. College basketball games are better, especially at the power conference level. When we have big games, they feel like bigger games when they're not competing with other big games. So last year, I believe, the first Saturday in January, we had Kentucky play Florida at Rupp Arena, and it was an awesome game with shot making back and forth. And part of the reason why it was so awesome, it wasn't competing against any other games. ESPN or any other network should keep that standalone window late Saturday mornings. But beyond that, NC State has an opportunity to get a signature victory on Saturday against Virginia, and it also has an opportunity to play Wake Forest at home. After that, this is the schedule for NC State at the start of January. At BC, at Florida State, Georgia Tech at home, at Clemson, and at Pitt. There is an opportunity here for NC State to make a move. But for NC State to make a move, NC State's got to get more out of Darian Williams. And Darian Williams is somebody who came to Raleigh with the hype, with the pedigree, and with the potential of being one of the best players in the ACC and being an All-American this season for the Wolfpack. He hasn't played that way. And if Darian Williams is going to command the type of commitment that NC State made to him to beat out other programs like Kansas for his services, he has to play better. He's playing right now like a solid piece to the puzzle, much like he was at Texas Tech. But last year in the NCAA tournament, Williams flipped the switch. Williams became a player that looked like somebody who could carry a team. Williams played at a much higher level in the NCAA tournament than he did throughout the rest of the season last year at Texas Tech. Right now at NC State, he's been a bit of a disappointment. He can change that over the next 2.5 months. Darian Williams did not have a made field goal, okay, in the win before Christmas against Ole Miss. Darian Williams has been in single digits in 3 of his last 4 games. That's not going to get NC State to the NCAA tournament. NC State, 1 through 4, is capable of matching up with any team in America. Holloman is rock solid at point guard from Michigan State. Obviously, Quadir Copeland, who started his career at Syracuse, has been through the battles with Will Wade. You also have to love Paul McNeil as a threat. But NC State needs a lot more to Darian Williams, and it also needs a lot more out of Matthew Abel. Matthew Abel, the freshman, was supposed to come in and be a big-time player for Will Wade's squad. He has really struggled shooting the basketball in the month of December. And these freshmen that we are seeing, the outliers, Dybantsa, Boozer, Caleb Wilson, the list this year goes on and on. NC State needs more mileage out of Matthew Abel. Because if NC State is going to find a way to the NCAA tournament, it is going to have to be an awesome offensive team. There's major limitations up front. They are not going to beat people with their physicality. So they have to be an elite offensive team. And that starts this week against Wake Forest and Virginia. Virginia, to me, has been as impressive as any ACC team to start the season, not named Duke, Carolina, Louisville. And I'm looking right now at the conference. Duke, Carolina, Louisville, Virginia, and Clemson all look like, to me, teams that feel like locks for the NCAA tournament. Then you have a couple of other teams, NC State, Cal, Notre Dame, that are kind of flirting with that existence. ACC feels like it has half of its teams in the mix to be in the NCAA tournament in 2026. Want to hear your thoughts about Will Wade and NC State and their big week. Want to hear your thoughts about Purdue and also BYU and any other questions that are currently on your mind. The live chat is coming up on the other side of this. John Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now.
This is European soccer's biggest stage.
Written in the stars! What a difference she has made!
The question is, can you handle it?
Can you handle it?
The crowd here feels electric. Stream every match of the UEFA Women's Champions League on Paramount+.
All right, John Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now. Want to remind you, subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We're the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. Also want to remind you to like and subscribe on YouTube. We want to get to 300 likes this show. And also a special programming note. Friday, January 2nd, Inside College Basketball Now will be making its debut on CBS Sports Network at noon Eastern. And also on Tuesday, we are going to have an exclusive interview with Nebraska's Fred Hoiberg. It should hit YouTube at 8 a.m. Eastern. So all sorts of content right now as you get ready to turn the calendar to 2026. Let's now get into the chat, which is bleeding as usual. SVES411 says, John, with conference play coming, are Georgia and Vandy still to be on the top 5 of SEC teams in? Well, or SEC, the top of the SEC 5 games in. Look, I don't speculate on speculation. I'm not going to do that. This is what I know. The SEC has 8 teams that I think are going to be in play to make the NCAA tournament, maybe 9. Vandy and Georgia, to me, are clearly in that mix of 8 or 9. That's the best I can say. Things change real quickly when you get to conference play, when you have certain stretches of games. It happens with the snap of a finger. Vanderbilt has been one of the great stories of this season, but now Vanderbilt is going to have to play with regularity some of the better teams in the sport. And this is what happens in conference play. Now, the SEC does not have the star power it had last year when you had Auburn, the number 1 overall seed, and you had Florida, the eventual national champion, another number 1 seed. But the SEC should still have great volume compared to last year. This is what you got for Vanderbilt, who will play New Haven tonight in Nashville. At South Carolina, home Alabama, home LSU, at Texas, home Florida, at Arkansas. That represents the first 6 games for Vanderbilt in SEC play. At South Carolina, home Alabama, home LSU, at Texas, home Florida, at Arkansas. Mark Byington would sign right now for 4-2 and maybe 3-3. You don't know. Let's keep going right now on other comments here in the chat. Up T. Dre says, yo, my brethren, my Hoyas have great opportunities against St. John's, Seton Hall, Creighton, UConn, and Nova to build their resume. Well, look, Georgetown started out the season with a couple of nice wins at Maryland and then Clemson at home. But Georgetown has had some of that early momentum under Ed Cooley dissipate. It is a great opportunity, not a good, but a great opportunity for Georgetown on New Year's Eve against St. John's in Washington, D.C. That is a great opportunity for Georgetown to change the narrative. And St. John's, who started the season in the top 5, it's time for St. John's now, who, again, last year was a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament and did not have much of a non-conference resume. It's time now for St. John's to start getting on a roll in the Big East if it's going to have any chance of improving its NCAA tournament standing. This is what I'll say is the difference for St. John's this year. Based on the numbers, St. John's is going to have opportunities in conference play like Villanova, like UConn, and there are going to be more formidable games than there were a year ago. Providence, the record may not show it, is extremely explosive offensively. Georgetown, to me, is still a better basketball team than it was a year ago. So the Big East, while still it's struggling to have maybe the representation that I think everybody thought it might this year, the Big East has better teams than it did a year ago at Providence, at Seton Hall, at Georgetown, and at Villanova. Let's take another question here. Let's look right here. Brian Rackless says, John, let's talk UNC not getting enough love. Caleb has been phenomenal. 3 to 5 consistent double threats. Just brought back veteran captain Seth Trimble March. Well, this is one thing I want to say about North Carolina, and I talked about it last week on the show. One of the storylines that I don't think is getting enough attention is the job that Hubert Davis has done at North Carolina, and the Tar Heels will open ACC play Tuesday night in Chapel Hill against Florida State. A big question coming into the season was whether or not Hubert Davis was going to be the right guy long-term for North Carolina. North Carolina's 12-1. The only loss was Michigan State on a neutral court without Seth Trimble. Carolina has beaten Kansas. Carolina has beaten Ohio State. Carolina has won at Kentucky. Hubert Davis, in terms of players of significance, only really brought back Seth Trimble from last season. So he's not just doing a great coaching job. He's doing a great job with the way he's constructed the roster. And look, I do this 365 days a year. We want the best brands in college basketball to be as good as they can be. It's not okay for North Carolina, for Duke, for Kansas, for Kentucky, for UCLA, for Louisville, for any of those programs just to be okay. Let's keep going right now. Rick Blacharski says, John, does Baylor's James Najee addition further improve the strength of the Big 12? Look, Baylor was void of a big man. It added somebody in midseason. We'll see how this all comes to pass. But think about this for a second. It's a good way to temper expectations. When you take a week off from the gym, when you take 2 weeks off from the gym, when you go back to the gym, Are you the same person you were when you were in a routine? Absolutely not. James Najee needs to get acclimated to Baylor's system, to the terminology, to all those things. And unless you're adding somebody in the middle of the season that was on the level of a Cam Boozer or a Caleb Wilson, it's just going to be a marginal impact. We'll wait and see. But this is what I'm telling you now, if you're following the Big 12. 5 teams right now: Houston, Arizona, Iowa State, BYU, Texas Tech, that in my opinion are going to be among the top 16 seeds in the NCAA tournament on Selection Sunday. And then you have Kansas out there lingering. Bill Self said recently that Darren Peterson's family decided that it was in their best interest, his best interest, if Kansas waited until he was all the way healthy for him to come back and play. How much longer is this going to just linger out there? How much longer is this going to be a distraction for Kansas? And I wonder if Kansas is just better off knowing that he's unavailable. Bill Self was able to coach Kansas without Darren Peterson to wins in Las Vegas during the Players Era Festival against Tennessee, against Notre Dame, against Syracuse. Kansas had real rhythm and chemistry. But from a coaching perspective, from a coaching staff perspective, how much of a nuisance is it to go to practice, to get ready for a game, and you don't know if this guy, even if he isn't a potentially top pick in the 2026 NBA draft, but you don't know if this guy's healthy. And it's clear that there are other things at stake right now, which is Darren Peterson's pro future. And I respect that. Everybody has a right to do exactly what you want with your own future and your own vocation. Everybody has that right. But this is sometimes what you deal with when you are dealing with highly touted freshmen, and it doesn't always translate to winning at the highest level. Darren Peterson's a great talent, but sooner or later, Kansas is going to have to find out if he is going to be somebody who's regularly in the lineup or not. I'll say it again. It's happened multiple times in the last 10 years. And I'm not saying Kansas at all is on this trajectory, because Kansas, I think, has a chance to be a pretty good team. I don't know if they'll be a top 16 seed on Selection Sunday, but I think they have a chance to be a pretty good team. Flory Badunga has done a really nice job, but I'm going to say this again. Rutgers had 2 of the top 5 picks last year in the NBA draft, Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. Rutgers won 15 games. And 3 other times in the last 10 years, we have had 3 players, Anthony Edwards at Georgia, Markelle Fultz at Washington, and also Ben Simmons at LSU, play college basketball for 1 season, and their teams did not make the NCAA tournament. Florida and Houston played for a national championship last year. A national championship. Those teams were filled with multi-year college veterans. It's 2 different wavelengths. 2 different wavelengths. Let's take another question here as we continue to move along. This is Inside College Basketball Now with John Rothstein. A lot of NC State fans. A lot of people. User 22676 says, who do you think will win the Big 12? Arizona, Iowa State, or Houston? Also, do you think Gonzaga will get a 1 seed? Well, I'll say this. Gonzaga, to me, is going to be in fierce competition with Arizona for the 1 seed in the West. Gonzaga, I watched them last night for a bit against Pepperdine, is getting great play out of Braden Smith, not the Braden Smith from Purdue, but Braden Smith, the Colgate transfer, who redshirted last year, was the Patriot League Player of the Year in 23-24. Braden Smith for Gonzaga is now playing like an all-West Coast Conference caliber player. He's got 20 assists to 2 turnovers in his last 3 games. Gonzaga has major equity on its non-conference resume. So does Arizona. Arizona is going to have a much tougher January and February than Gonzaga, but Arizona also has a number of big wins. Those are the 2 teams that are vying to be the number 1 seed in the West. Let's take a couple more. Pack with Gary is talking about Darian Williams, and he says, John Williams has to flip that switch now. I agree. Look, I was somebody who, after watching Darian Williams last year in the NCAA tournament with Texas Tech, said, you take this guy to a different place. You put him now as a featured guy, not with JT Toppin, not with Christian Anderson. He's somebody who can be an All-American. He's been a nice player so far. Played really well against Kansas, 17-10. Hasn't been consistent. 3 single-digit games in his last 4. 1 point and no made field goals against Ole Miss. That's not going to cut it. He's a solid player right now. We'll find out starting this week against Wake and Virginia just how good Darian Williams is. Let's see if we got any more. User 22676 wants to talk more about AJ Dybantsa. Look, I've said it before. I will say it again. And we'll talk plenty of BYU later this week as well. This next 60 to 75-day period, if you were a BYU fan, you may never have again in your life. This might be the golden era of BYU basketball, the golden era unfolding right in front of us. You've got a guy in AJ Dybantsa that if he elevates BYU to a team that could maybe win a Big 12 regular season title, he could be in the mix to be the National Player of the Year. You got a guy in Richie Saunders that did not leave BYU after getting better and better and better. He was loyal to the program. 2 years ago, Richie Saunders was a glue guy. Now he's a borderline All-American. And you have a guy in Rob Wright who is playing like an all Big 12 caliber player, had that massive shot against Clemson at the Jimmy V earlier this month in the Garden. And he got Kennard Davis, one of the best perimeter defenders in the sport. 1 through 4, BYU can match up with anybody. Beyond that, a big question. But this is only December. Let's now continue into segment 3 as we go through some news and notes before we get out of here. 3 good nuggets. Sharing is caring. Vanderbilt is assisting on 60.4% of its made field goals entering tonight's game against New Haven in Nashville. Mark Byington's team still undefeated. Nugget number 2, sitting by the dock of the bay, Cal and Stanford are combined 23-3 this season. It's going to be real interesting to see how ACC teams handle that trip to the West Coast over the next couple of months. Now, nugget number 3, go Bilodeau. UCLA's Tyler Bilodeau is playing very quietly like one of the best offensive front court players in the country. Bilodeau right now for the Bruins, averaging 19 points per game, 5.2 rebounds per game, shooting about 55% from the field, 47 from 3, and 93% from the foul line. That's a ridiculous run for Tyler Bilodeau in UCLA, who is 10-3 right now. All right, 3 games to watch. We will do 3 games between now and our next show, which is Friday this week. Tuesday night, Louisville is at Cal. Bears are 10-1 in year 2 under Mark Madsen. We're at the 43-minute mark. Need some water. Wednesday, Virginia at Virginia Tech. Hokies look like a bubble team under Mike Young. Wednesday, UConn is at Xavier. 3 under-the-radar games tonight. Ivy League favorite Yale visits Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Tuesday, UNC hosts Florida State in the ACC opener. And then Wednesday, St. John's is at Georgetown. I need an Army with me every single episode here on Inside College Basketball Now. And I need you to be a part of that Army. Be all you can be. Subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. Once again, we are the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. Nebraska's Fred Hoiberg will be our exclusive guest Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern on YouTube. And then Friday, Inside College Basketball Now makes its cable TV debut on CBS Sports Network. My big intro just got robbed. It's okay. Want to know why? This is only December. John Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now.